Hi, this is Darren of The Draw on Zazzle.com and elsewhere. In this video, we are going to be gathering some tips and advice, perhaps reiterating a couple things, about customizing an item from the Gather Round Kwanzaa Creations Kit, which is a collection of items, each of which has over 80 images available, which is to say, over 80 images that you can use as you wish, display or hide as you wish, to customize, to personalize, to truly create your own unique item for Kwanzaa. Of course, there's links in the description to the collection itself, to a catalog of images available. I have also done two other videos, one that's a more general overview of the collection with some basic editing information, another that takes a much more in-depth look at customizing an item. So you might be interested in either of those. But let's go ahead and get started. One important thing, which I did not mention in the other videos, I suppose because it's not editing and it's not even really customizing per se, but it sort of is. Definitely something which you will encounter and you want to be aware of. A lot of these items come in different sizes or styles. So for instance, the tile, you can get large or small. Just two different sizes. The stamps, for instance, you can choose between a horizontal or a vertical orientation. You can choose between three different sizes. Or, even more elaborate, the mug. You have several different forms or styles to pick from, including a couple that aren't even really, I wouldn't even call them mugs. A stein definitely is not a mug. I'm not even sure I would call that a mug, although Zazzle does. But either way. Again, a couple different style or a couple different size choices. And it would be ideal if, a design as it appears on a certain size or style would stay that way when going to another one. But unfortunately, that is not always the case. Now, certainly for some items it is. So for instance, the tile here, we switched to small, back to large. It seems as though, except for being smaller or bigger, it didn't really affect the design at all. So, that's okay. That's good. On the other hand, if we look at this button in the design interface, we can see that everything is contained within the safe line, this green dotted line. Zazzle advises that all text and images that you don't want cut off be kept in that line, just in case the printing process, would trim something beyond it. But yeah, everything's contained. On the other hand, if we go to a smaller button, let's say we go to the real small button here and check back, now, some of the text is going beyond that safe line, which, again, my personal experience has been that things usually print the way they appear in the preview, but again, Zazzle would advise not to do that, so that could be an issue. Let's see, even more troublesome though would be on these stamps, for instance. So you can see here the table, it goes to the bottom like it should. Everything looks in order. Everything looks right. On the other hand, if we switch to the small stamps, you might notice even the size, the actual dimensions of the design area changed a little bit. And now there's this empty space, or this blank space. The table does not extend to the bottom anymore. We can even see that the draped bandera goes beyond it slightly, which normally, when it was all the way down, we couldn't see that. And, of course, needless to say, switching between the orientations would change it, but you would expect that. But changing sizes, you maybe wouldn't. And, that's not quite maybe what you wanted. Or the mug, for instance. Say you had a mug you designed, and you were happy with it, except you thought, well, maybe you wanted to try the larger size. Well, again, there's spaces now where the border doesn't go all the way to the top and bottom anymore. If we look here in the center, we see the table doesn't extend to the bottom anymore. You can clearly see that in the design interface. The space down there, spaces there and there. And yeah, needless to say, especially if you've spent a lot of time customizing something, designing your own unique item, and then, along the way you think, well, you might want to see what a different size would look like or what a different style would look like, and it gets all messed up. That could be very frustrating, could be very aggravating. And unfortunately, while Zazzle does save a copy of something you're working on in your account under Save Designs, I believe, it only saves one copy, the current copy. So if you switch to a different size or style and something really gets messed up in the design, and you switch back and it's still messed up or it's not right, that's the copy Zazzle will have saved, and there is no way that I know of that you could somehow go back to how it had been. So this is, like I said, something you definitely want to be aware of. I would advise, if you know in advance that there's a certain like size or style that you definitely want, I would definitely say get that size and style, work like design on that size and style, and don't worry about the others. But of course, the creative process sometimes, it's not that set in stone. You might be working on something and it might just kind of occur to you that, like, hey, it actually would be better on this other style, or it'd be better if it was larger, or better if it was smaller. So you can't always help that. And there's never a guarantee that you can get something back the way it was, but there are certain things you can try that often will work. So for instance, let's go back to the stamps. So say we go down to small and it's kind of disturbed and it's like, well, this isn't what we wanted. Well, go into the design interface and let's see, you might go up here to select all. So the whole thing, the whole design, all the images that are here on screen are now selected. And you might want to just, well, actually, not only what's visible, even all the hidden images are also selected, which might be good to know. But anyway, so you have everything selected. Go ahead and just start moving this down so the table gets back to where it should be. Maybe move that. Okay, get that. Try to have that exact. Go here to deselect everything. Alternatively, you could have went up here to select none, but get everything deselected. The table's back where it should be, but this background isn't. So now go ahead and do fill just on the background. That'll center and expand it to fill everything up. And that's more or less back to what you had. It is a little conspicuous now that there seems to be a lot of blank space up here. You could go ahead and go to select all again, maybe expand a little bit. Let's see. Don't want to maybe do too much, but expand a little, kind of get that repositioned again. Go to select none, select the background again, even though it is filling everything up. Maybe go ahead and do fill just for the sake of centering it and having it not larger than it would need to be. Let's see, maybe drag this poster up a little bit, perhaps, kind of fill up some of that space. And that seems pretty good. It seems like that's more or less the way it had been, except now in a smaller size stamp. So, that wasn't too hard. The items on the table never got messed up, so that really wasn't an issue, ultimately. But let's consider the mug, for instance. Say you switch to the larger size, and of course you see that it's kind of messed up, and you think, well, you could work on this. You'd have to select all the items individually here now, for the table setting. So for instance, and depending on whichever key you would use on your operating system to select multiple items, you could begin going through that. So there's the table and the tablecloth, the Kente spread. Let's see, a lot of things to go through. The Mkeka, let's see, the Jembe, the standing book. So you can kind of, as a guide, see which items have, are visible, which have the eye icon illuminated, but just go through and select all of the items that appear in the table setting. A little bit tedious, not too bad, but maybe a little bit. All right, and again, just move all of those now as a group, get the table back down where it should have been. As for the borders, you could go ahead and expand those a bit to get them to reach from the top to the bottom. You could go ahead and reposition it so it's flush against the left. Over here you could do the same thing and get that flush to the right. This is, well, pretty much back. You can see that the text here is a little bit messed up, so maybe you would try to move that back up a little bit and get that back in position, more or less. Some of the text is blocked here, so maybe you would move, that over a little bit to try to clear that up. And that doesn't seem terrible. That seems like that may more or less be how it was. So, sometimes it might just take repositioning a few things, redoing a couple things. But again, so let's go ahead and reset that the way it was. Again, say you go to large, go to customize, you see it's kind of disrupted, and you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to go back to the small. I don't want to worry about all that. but again, it's not back the way it was, supposed to be, the way you had it. Let's go ahead and put that back. And you can see that clearly. It's not extending over to the sides. There's blank design area. The borders are not going where they should. The table isn't. The whole thing is kind of messed up again. And again, while I would never guarantee that you can do this successfully, again, you could go to select all, just expand the entire thing, everything. And it really, the table's back how it should be. The border extends where it should. The text seems okay. It seems as though expanding it back like that took care of it. So that, it's possible. You switch to a different size or style and back and it's all disrupted. You might be able to just scale it up and it might be fine. Or like I said, as I showed, you might just have to tweak a few things and it might be fine. So keep that in mind if you're working on something and it seems as though it's gotten really disrupted. This looks like it's really off. It might not be as bad as it looks and it might be fairly easily fixed. Maybe. But again, that's something you want to be aware of. If you know you want a certain size and style, maybe do that from the start. Maybe experiment beforehand with the default design to see what happens when you switch between sizes or styles. That's just something to, look out for, kind of watch out for. Okay, so another thing we might kind of revisit is maximum image resolutions and what happens when images are too large. So for instance, let's look at this Vibunzi baby blanket. Say you wanted to, and again, this is just for, kind of informational purposes. This might not be something you would actually want to do. You probably want to take some of this off if you were going to do this. But let's say you decide that you're going to put a photo on here. So that's the default size as, I had it set up. But say you wanted to fill this to, cover the whole blanket. You do that. But all of a sudden, Zazzle puts this little, exclamation point here, and it's telling you, oh, it's a blurry image, larger than its original size, maybe blurry or pixelated when the product is produced. Probably tells you this up front too. If you went out of the design interface, it would probably warn you about that outside of it even. Zazzle will not prohibit you, as far as I know. Zazzle will not stop you from getting an item just because one or more images could be blurry or pixelated, and because they have fairly high standards, it might even be that if it's only a little bit larger, only expanded a little bit beyond what it should be, it will not be pixelated or blurry. They're just trying to be extra safe about it. So keep that in mind, that that's not necessarily something that you have to fix. It's not necessarily a problem, but if it is, yeah, make sure that's selected. You can just, you may have noticed there, it took me 3 attempts to click on, this button to scale it down before it did. Not to digress too much, but that is an important point too. The design interface can be glitchy sometimes, probably just because, it is letting you work in real time on doing all of these modifications. So it's probably to be expected, but it can be a little glitchy sometimes. Items or images may not, you're trying to expand them or contract them. It may not happen right away. Things may not happen right away. If, you're being really precise and trying to, get images to be sized like the same, if that happens, you can always just go back to fit. Well, fill or fit, but fit would probably be more useful. And you can always just go back to that as a base point to begin working again. Now you see that time it shrunk it down right away, so no problem. But just keep that in mind. That's a little, tip for trying to get things, sized the same if you're doing that. But anyway, back to image resolution, so you can just keep shrinking it down until the warning goes away, and then you know that you definitely don't have to contend with that. That's not a problem. But yeah, that's just something to watch out for. And if you're wondering what exactly that means, that it's too large or why it would be pixelated, all these images are large or small in terms of how many pixels they contain. And the larger an image is, the more pixels it contains, the more you might expand it in the design interface. Those pixels gradually get enlarged, but because there's more of them, the whole thing can be expanded more. The whole image can be expanded more. But in some cases, because images may be a little bit smaller, or because the design area, it might be so large. In real life, you could be talking about several feet possibly on very large items. it just works out that some images cannot be expanded beyond a certain point, without that becoming an issue. The individual pixels become too large to the point that the image might be blurry, because you might be able to see individual pixels. So, yeah. So that's just something to kind of be aware of. And let's see, before I leave this, getting back to my earlier digression about the glitches, sometimes you might notice that you might try to show an image and it may not. Obviously here now it came up with no problem, but you might find sometimes it gets a little unresponsive with showing or hiding things. If that happens with whichever images you're working on at the time, you can just try to maybe hide them both and kind of bring them back. That usually can kind of clear that up. Or if that doesn't seem to work, you can just try reordering the images. So just, simple reordering, just drag one light down and then back up or whatnot. And that should definitely get that fixed up. But again, just something to kind of watch out for in terms of glitches. And something I want to point out again, getting back to the image resolutions. Let's see. Consider this Vibunzi pillow. So speaking of different styles, well, this is actually kind of a different size on a style, but say you wanted to go to the lumbar pillow version, and you do that, you might notice it's telling you that there's 10 issues with the product. So you might think, well, what happened to switching to a different size or different style? What's wrong here? Well, it turns out, even though the photos of the celebrated leaders down here, none of these are actually on this product by default. They are part of the product, even though they're hidden by default. And it's claiming that on this form of the pillow that they're too large. All right. So that's a little unexpected. You might not think that just because you make a simple change that you're going to all of a sudden have an issue with image sizes. So that's something to kind of be aware of. And I should point out that I can't guarantee it, but I would expect that it is in fact the photos of the celebrated leaders, the activists and whatnot, that you will most likely encounter this problem on, because these are obviously the only images or photos in the entire collection that obviously I did not design these. I did not do these. These were public domain photos. So therefore, some of them they just don't have they're just not large. I mean, the things I actually drew and scanned in, I tried to ensure that they were very large, and in almost all cases they would be fine. But yeah, so these, point being, these would be the first place to look if you automatically get warnings about images that are too small or too large in the design. But what's weird here, you try to show these or hide these, that doesn't work. If you were trying to move things around for whatnot, if you try to select it and bring up the controls to shrink it, nothing is responsive here. Even clicking done, nothing happens. You can't bring up this menu. Nothing is responsive. Now, I am not sure if this is just a major glitch that is just temporary here, or if this is something in the event that, there is a problem like this, if this is something that automatically happens or not. I'm not sure. But what I will say is if you encounter this, and you see what the problem was, you saw what the problem was, it was the photos. You could go ahead and go in on the default form of the item, go down to the images that were in question, and it wasn't all 7 of them, but, just to be safe, maybe work through here, shrink all those down. Now you might think, well, because I chose not to make any of these visible, how do I know that there's not a glitch where it is maybe not shrinking them down all the way? There could be. I'm just not overly concerned about it, since this is only for informational purposes. But yeah, definitely you maybe want to actually show these and watch out for that if it really mattered or mattered to you. But yeah, so let's go on the back now. Go ahead and shrink these down. It's even possible that it's even possible that you maybe could just go ahead and select all of them as a group and just shrink those down. Either way. But yeah. All right. So those should all be shrunk down. Let's now switch to the lumbar form. And the problem seems to be fixed. It's not warning us anymore about that. We go into the design interface. We're back to being able to, use everything. We have the controls back. Yeah. So again, I don't know if that was just, a glitch that's going on temporarily with Zazzle's site, or if that is something that may happen, that if some of the images by default are too large on a certain style, it'll completely lock up the design interface and you can't do anything. But if that does happen, just look to see which images are a problem, go back in the default form, shrink those down a little bit, and then you should be okay to proceed from there. And of course, yeah, one last thing as far as, styles and sizes go. If you do switch to a style which has a different shape, like in the case going from a square pillow to a lumbar pillow like this, obviously there's not going to be any way for that design to carry over properly. So you would have to kind of, revamp things, change things around, move things around, shrink things probably, that would be inevitable at that point. But yeah. But even if not, just kind of be aware of these kinds of issues, and with, images being too large possibly, and all that. So, to finish up here, let's see, I just want to point out a couple things with designing that are, maybe not necessarily apparent or easy to see. Let's see. I suppose I can do this on here. As far as this Kuumba background is concerned, this Kuumba background extended, let's go ahead and get the wall off here. Say you want to do this, but it's one image. Obviously, it's only one image, but you actually can get different effects, almost, not quite, but almost different designs out of this one image. And how you do that is as follows. So we have it here. If you just say for some reason it was not quite fully expanded, or it was a little bit off, or it was, whatever, if it wasn't quite placed, you can just go to fill. That should expand it and center it. And that's one form. But let's say you shrink it down just a little bit. You could leave it unshrunk, but let's say you and there it goes again where it's kind of glitchy. I'm shrinking it, but it's not doing anything. So again, just kind of watch out for that. Yeah, but let's say you shrink it down a couple times. In fact, because when it does glitch like that, you may not see how many times it did it. Let's just kind of reset that. It's always helpful sometimes to just reset with fill or fit and just start over. It's precise. But let's say we shrink it down 3 times. Go to tile this image. All right, so we have that. But now, let's say you wanted to shake things up a bit. Let's get rid of tile this image. Let's go to grid lines up here. What you can do is you can move this so that it's off to one side, either left or right, either top or bottom. So let's maybe, and I think that's centered, certainly centered with the Mishumaa in the center. But yeah, now if you go to tile it, it's not drastically different, of course, because it comes from the same image, but it is a little bit different. It's not quite the same anymore. Or say that you moved it, both left or right and up or down. So let's try to see if we can get it centered on that line. Tile. Again, this is yet another form. Now we've got, you might think of these in terms of which color is in the center. It was green on the last one. Now it's the gold that was in the center. I believe it was the black that was in the center originally. Let's take that off again. So we looked at leaving it as it was, moving it all the way to the left and up, or say you just go up or down, either up or down, or left or right. That should be fine. But let's see if we get that centered again. I think that's centered. Let's this one up here, but no, I think it's that lower one. So well, one of those two. A little confusing with some of the other things on here, but tile it like that, and now you've got, lastly, the red in the center. So again, it's not like these are drastically different, but considering that it's the same image in all cases, you actually can get variations on it. So that's something you might want to consider, something that might come in, handy, you might want to do. But yeah. And I might want to point out, because so you might see here there's 2 Vibunzi But of course, depending on how many children you have, if any, you obviously might want to put more than that. And I just want to point out again, kind of reiterate some things to keep in mind when you're working with the Vibunzi. Let's actually get this Mazao out of here for now so we can kind of get a better idea behind this. Now, here the Vibunzi are just sitting presumably next to each other. They're perfectly, straight on the table. Nothing fancy. You could, on the other hand, rotate them slightly. So let's say maybe 10 degrees might be good so that, both of them are not simply laying straight. There is a little bit of, variation there. Or if you need to put more, let's see. So let's put that, let's see. Let's have that up just a little bit more. Let's put this back so it's kind of by its side. Now suppose you wanted to have it as though there was a third Vibunzi sitting like kind of between and on top of those two. How would you accomplish that? Let's see. Maybe we'll go ahead and try the blue one. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So you drag this down. Of course, you try to position it more or less in the center, maybe back a little bit. But you notice you don't even see it. And you might think, well, what happened? It's not even visible. Well, the fact is that it's hidden. It's below these two up here. So therefore, even though it's set to be visible, it's covered up and it can't be seen. Well, you might say, okay, so let's move that up so it's above both of them. And that, so you try that, and that actually is looking pretty good. Of course, you could tweak that to try to get it to look exactly how you'd want it to, but maybe see if we can drag that. Well, no, not that one. When you get things close together like this, it'd be kind of hard to select which one you want, but let's see if we can manage it. Let's bring that red one down a little bit. Maybe a little bit too much there. Bring it down just a little bit more. And that, again, you'd want to tweak it some, but that kind of makes it appear then as though the blue one is sitting on top of the other two. But what I really want to get across here is just kind of be mindful of that. Suppose you had the blue one in between these two. Now it would be as though it was on top of the red, but then somehow the yellow was on top of that. That wouldn't quite look right. So just kind of, be aware of if you want to set up more complicated setups with the Vibunzi, have several like that stacked or have some of them rotated or whatnot. Just kind of be aware of that, how to do the rotations and how to order them so that they appear the way they should. Yeah, so you just want to kind of watch out for that. Let's see, one thing might be helpful to keep in mind is if you need to do really, really small adjustments to something. And to illustrate there what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and clear off most of the stuff off the table. Yeah, let's get rid of the Vibunzi. Get rid of the Kuumba Mojo. Let's get that all off. Say, let's see how to best show this. Suppose, for instance, you had the mkeka. Up here, you had it centered. You wanted to move it down on the table. In fact, let's get rid of the drape bandera. So you select the mkeka. Either you could drag it down, but if you wanted to keep it centered, you might as well just use the buttons. And see, that looks like it's closer to the back of the table than it is the front. If you do a smaller adjustment, that might be a little closer to the front than the back. Now, if it's only a very small difference, you might not even be concerned about that. It may not matter. And again, I should point out, aside from doing the large moves, if you look in shortcuts, you do have the option to do smaller moves, which I've been doing throughout this. Alt, the arrow key, they say here, or on a Macintosh, I'm using the command key, but you do have the option to do smaller ones like this. But suppose here, it just isn't quite, centering. You do have the option to just click and drag it ever so slightly. And I do mean ever so slightly, just barely drag the mouse. Barely drag it. And you might be able to make very precise movements. So you might see that seemed now like that is more or less centered. Yeah, and again, you can do that. Just click and drag and just be very, very precise, very slow with the mouse. You can, because the mouse obviously can move up and right, left and right, up and down. You might run into problems where you're trying to do that and it moves over at the same time. Of course, if you don't want that, you just go up to undo and just try to redo it, to get that fixed. anyway, one last thing to kind of recap or to reiterate is working with the flames. By default, they will, especially if there was already a table setting by default on the item, the flames will match up with it, or should match up with it pretty well. Even if it wasn't a table setting by default, when I was setting it up, I still would have worked on a table setting, and I would have had the flames matched up to a certain Kinara. So you should always be able to find which of the 3 Kinara the flames, work on. But naturally, if the whole idea is to try to customize and create your own, unique item. So suppose you do want to swap out the Kinara for another one, and you find then that the flames are not, on it like they should be. You just have to go and, potentially scale them, move them around certainly, and try to fix that. If you have any way on your browser or your operating system to zoom in, that can be very helpful in these cases because, it's very, kind of small adjustments you're making. It's helpful to zoom in. But yeah, let's see, kind of get a rough idea. Does that seem like it's really the right size for it? It actually seems like for these bigger candles that might be a little bit too small. So let's see if we do a full scaling up. Does that make it too big or does that seem okay? Let's check. If anything. About right. We might even say just still not quite right. Let's see. So let's go ahead. We're going to, if we can, we're going to go ahead and select all of the flames. Again, well, you can see the problems because it's such small space. You can see the problems that I'm running into, that it's the X to delete is coming up, the button for rotating is coming up. Might as well just be better to just go over here and just select them all on the list. But yeah, let's maybe scale up a full one, maybe do 2 smaller ones. Hopefully that's okay. And as far as placing these goes, again, despite the names that might suggest certain wicks that they correspond to, they don't strictly correspond to any. As long as no wicks coming out of the side, that should be fine. Just comes down to dragging them and, trying to place them. And if it looks like there's still wick there between the candle and the flame, it doesn't look natural, you can just undo it to where it was. Just try to bring it back and just try it again. And that probably is okay. I mean, some of this comes down to personal preference. You may think things look better or worse than I would, or that someone else would. But yeah, that, considering that was the first attempt to move that there, that seems like that's pretty good. Yeah, and I do find sometimes it's helpful to bring the flame completely away from the candle and from the Kinara and just from there drag it back down and try it. Depending on how the wick, which way the wick is and how the flame is, which direction the flame itself may be in. You might find you don't want to center this totally. You might want to move it to the side possibly. Here, I might actually put it just slightly over to the left. And let's see. And sometimes if it stay highlighted for a time, if you just click it and click out, that should fix that. I would say that might be just a little too far down. So I would maybe go and redo that. But again, that's up to you. Let's see. And working with the flames is probably the most tedious thing there is with these items. But if you really want flames on your Kinara, it's not so bad. All right, that'd probably be okay, I'd say. But yeah. But anyway, so again, just pointing out with the flames that you may need to adjust them. It is a little bit tedious. If you have a way with your browser or operating system to zoom in, that can definitely be very helpful. You may want to shrink them down or expand them. Of course, you'll have to reposition them, and that can be a little tedious. You might find it helpful, again, at times to drag them back out or go to undo to drag them out and try to drag them back in. If they don't quite look right the first time, it may take a few times, several times, maybe even per candle, but you can do it. It can be done. And I think that more or less concludes everything. Of course, by all means, if you are working on customizing or creating your own item and you run into some problem that you just can't seem to get past, or you just can't seem to figure out what's going on or how you can get something the way you want, you can always, of course, contact me, whether through my Zazzle store or from my website or, from wherever. Definitely from my, my website and my Zazzle store, without question. But yeah, you can always just contact me. Within the design interface, I should point out too, these design tips. This actually brings up Zazzle's own video for working in the design interface. Now, it is, as you can see, it's considerably shorter than my videos, but on the other hand, it is very generic. It's going to go through the basics and it's going to be very generic, so that may not be terribly helpful if it's really something very specific to this collection, to these images and whatnot. But yeah, so I hope that, kind of gathering these tips together, kind of reiterating some things from the other videos, maybe was helpful. There wasn't anything new in this video except for all the information about designs being disrupted when you switch between sizes and styles. So you might want to refer back to this video, especially for that. But otherwise, nothing really new, just kind of gathering some things together. I hope maybe it was helpful or maybe cleared some things up. And like I said, as always, if you really just are stuck with something, something that doesn't seem to be working the way it should, you just can't get something the way you want it, you can always contact me to see if I might have any, specific advice for what you're facing or what you're dealing with it. And of course, definitely, especially if you're really getting frustrated, I would encourage you to do that, because the collection is not supposed to be about being frustrated or aggravated. It's supposed to be, fun, that you can kind of gather your family around, maybe your friends, your children, especially if you have children. And, you can just have a fun time, a joyous time, just trying to create something unique, something, that would be all your own, that would be significant and special to you and your family. So, yeah. I think that concludes everything then. I do not plan on doing any other videos for this. That could change, but for now I don't. So that was a general overview, a more in-depth look, and gathering some specific tips and advice. I hope that all was helpful. And hopefully, you'll check out the collection. Yeah, thank you, and for now, goodbye.